All right, we're back here at Club Redfern, but very pleased to be joined by prominent Australian author Alan Whiticker. Thanks for joining us, Al.
Great to be here, boys.
So we'll start with this book, League on Sunday, Work on Monday. Tell us about how your involvement came about with Tone and how you worked through the book, I guess.
Well, some years ago when I was working as a commissioning editor at a publishing house, I was a teacher for 30 years and then I moved into publishing. Tony is a great historian of speedway and racing car history, and I was looking for sport titles. That was sort of my forte as a publisher, and Tony had a great collection of speedway photos, so I published a book of his in about 2013, 2014, and we got talking about rugby league at the time. And he said, I'd love to do a rugby league book, and at the time I was the sort of leading rugby league author in the company. Ian Collis and I, who is an Uber collector, has a great collection of Australian sporting history. We were writing quite significantly together. We published about 15 books together. And I said, look, if it ever comes up, I'd love to work with you. So fast forward 10 years and I'm semi-retired. I finished up with the publishing house a couple of years ago. I'm working on my own projects. Tony is a niche publisher, a boutique publisher. He's got a very, I don't want to say narrow marketplace, but he's got a very defined database of buyers of his books, and he felt that his database could handle a really high-end 400-page hardcover 1,000 picture book at $69.95. And I said, look, you're being the boutique publisher, you're taking all the risk. Ian and I are happy to come on board and help you with it, but as long as you feel that you can publish this and sell it, we'd be happy to work with you. So we worked for about 3-4 months on this, and because the period that we focused on was from 65 to 95, and we see that as a glory years of rugby league. So the Panthers came into the New South Wales Rugby League Premiership in 67. I was a kid in 67, so I've grown up with the Panthers all my life. Ian's a Balmain supporter, Tony's a North Sydney supporter, so we brought a lot of history to that book. So we thought we could do something special, and 6 months later, publication of the book.
Yep, it's a beautiful book. I've got my own copy over there. There's
I've got 3 copies.
Yes, they're ready to go. Christmas is sorted for a few of us.
I've got 6 copies, yeah.
So it's been a pretty successful night, a good turn. I know Anthony's happy. We'll get back to...
I just need to bring it up, otherwise I'm going to have a few people rousing on me. You talk about growing up. You actually grew up next to my father, my uncles, my aunties. Growing up, played footy with them. My father would go on to play a season in under-23s with Penrith in 82. I guess just give us a little bit of background about how you got into rugby league and growing up, because he does tell stories of you guys actually playing in the backyard together, so you've always grown up supporting rugby league.
Well, the great thing about being born and bred and growing up in Penrith, and I still live in Penrith, and I'm 62 in 5 days' time, is that Penrith is a rugby league town. Yep. So the Panthers, good and bad, successful and unsuccessful eras, permeates the whole town. And even as a young kid in the 60s or 70s, rugby league, before we even knew what rugby league was, it was very much a big part of the town. So growing up, everybody kicked a football in the backyard. Yep. And in those days, the backyards were pretty big. And we lived next door to the Kellners. Cheer out to Paddy and to Mick and to Tony and
Ronnie.
Yeah, Ronnie.
Would have been little back then.
Haven't seen Ronnie for years. I know he's out there.
He's at Maitland at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we had great times with my older brother and my younger brother, just kicking around. But I do have to say your family were much better footballers than we were, and they played, high-end grade football at Cambridge Park and for lower grades. And, it's like everything. It's like you guys too, I imagine, that not everyone needs to play rugby league at the highest level to be part of the game.
Yeah.
You can be a fan, or you can be someone who, in today's age, blogs or writes or podcasts like you guys do. It's about everyone finding their level where they can creatively add something to the game. And for me, as a kid, it was scrapbooks. So it was cutting out all the papers, all the newspaper articles. And there wasn't much about Penrith in those days. It's pasting them together. It's reconfiguring what's in your head onto a piece of paper, making a scrapbook out of it. It's collecting cards, collecting photos, going to training, getting autographs. You know, I was a big autograph fan for a long time, but I'm not an autograph fan now. But doing all those things that made you a fan. And then as you grew up, which happened to me in the 70s and the 80s, is that a lot of your mates are playing grade. And I was very lucky to have a couple of close mates. One here tonight, Taz Batiri, who was the year above me in high school, very good schoolboy footballer, played for Penrith. And, you know, cheering those guys on. And then it was like, okay, what else can I do? And writing about rugby league, you know, I always wanted to be a journalist, and I didn't become a journalist, I became a school teacher. But one of the things that I was always taught was write what you know about. And what we knew about in Penrith was the whole rugby league milieu, you know. Who's hot, who's not, who's winning, who's losing, what are the stories, who are the great players, what's the history.
And to set the stage, just even for me, I grew up, went to school as you know, same age, 90, even primary school, 90 through 97. Part of our school assembly was to sing the Panthers song. That was, instead of the national anthem, we'd sing the Mighty Panthers.
I'd like to have gone to that.
It
school.
was, it was depressing times, but it used to be part of that. We were at Jameson Public School, and it'd be no big thing to have one of the Guyers or one of the Alexanders or Fittler walking out at lunchtime and kick the ball.
And this is the great thing about being a rugby league town, is that the rugby league players, much more back in those days, were part of the community.
Yeah.
So you would see them down the street.
Yeah.
They would come to your school.
Yeah.
They were very accessible. Most of them had jobs. My grandparents owned a corner shop, and two of their reps were Penrith players, you know. So it was easy, I suppose, to develop your passion for the game. And, you know, when I was in my mid-20s, I was a school teacher. I was quite enjoying what I was doing. But, you know, how can you heighten your interest in rugby league? Well, I started writing stuff and sending off articles to the newspaper, trying to get published, little stats things and different things. And I was very lucky because Penrith was starting to become good. So in 1991, Penrith were hot. Not many people knew much about Penrith. So I was able to get a few things published. And then before I knew it, somebody said, well, do you want to write a book? Do you want to do this? So that led into publishing, and because I was a school teacher, I do maybe a project a year over the summer holidays. When my kids were small, I'd bury myself away for a couple of weeks and write a book, and then I'd have to wait for the next year and do another one, and that gained some momentum. So over 15 years, I had about 10 books published, and then the publisher said, look, why don't you come on board and work for me? So I've been able to take that passion for rugby league into another passion, which is publishing in books, which is a great industry.
I was going to ask what came first, because I know your passion for rugby league, and I know since you've branched out into other genres, I suppose you'd say. So was the footy came first, and then the publishing route led you down other roads?
No, I think I was always
you just went with your passions as you felt like, I'll write about this summer, or whatever it might be.
No, I think I was always a bibliophile, like as you're a kid. One of the things that, you know, maybe many of your listeners, if they're of my age, would remember as a kid is Penrith Library. You know, used to go down to Penrith Library and get a cartload of books and take home. And you know, I was a pretty avidicious reader, and I love books. I love collecting books. So I had a little personal library when I was a school teacher, and you know, I loved history, ancient history. I loved crime as well, crime books. I loved sport, different things. So I started collecting a bit of a personal library as well, but it was always about how do you get to that next level. And if anyone's listening, well, how do you get to the next level? Well, you just got to do it. You just got to write. And then you got to send stuff off, and you might get a reject, or you might, but at least I used to love reject letters because it meant somebody read it. You know, they replied to you. So it took me about 5 years to get published. It wasn't overnight. And then...
Do you still have, obviously, harder this day and age to keep your Word documents? How were you typing back then? Is it just you had the typewriter out? Was it handwritten? What was it?
I was very lucky because my...
Yeah, the Commodore 64.
No, way before then. I had a hand typewriter. My grandparents lived next door to us.
Yeah.
My mum and dad lived next door to each other, grew up together, childhood sweethearts, married, and my grandparents subdivided their property.
Oh, wow.
So we lived next door to both sets of grandparents.
Wow.
So we had a charmed childhood. And the Kellners.
And then the Kellners were just in there somewhere.
who were very close to my grandparents, very close. We were like a little community in ourselves. And my grandmother owned a typewriter, and I taught myself to type. You won't believe this, but one of my other passions is music. I'm a huge Beatles fan. I've written a couple of books on the Beatles, on popular music. And I learnt to type when I was about 11 years old by typing the lyrics of Beatles songs. So I listened to the record, write them down in longhand, and then taught myself to type. So by the time I got to university, teachers' college, I could type.
Yeah.
And I can type pretty quickly. So the typing wasn't the issue. It was the fact that I love books and the construction of books and putting it all together. Scrapbooks, what photo goes where, is that balanced, how do you set it up? Writing, I had older cousins who kept scrapbooks. You write the caption underneath. It was all just a process. So by the time I became an adult, I wanted to publish. It was second nature to me.
Mate, what's some of the most enjoyable books that you got to write about?
Well, look, obviously the first book that you ever publish is astronomical. The fact that you see your name on a book and you go, isn't this fantastic? And then you look back on it 10 years later and you say, gee, that's pretty crappy. It's a magazine. It's pretty thin. What was I thinking? But look, over the years I've had the opportunity to ghost a lot of biographies. Terry Lamb, Matty Rogers, Cliffy Lyons, Roy Simmons, and then more recently Luke Lewis's. And just sitting down with those guys and talking to them is just fantastic.
How does that process start? Is it at this day and age, is it a Zoom call, but is it we'll go for a beer, we'll start here?
No, it was all face-to-face in the old days with a camcorder, you know.
Yep.
Old school podcast.
Old school.
Yeah.
And then you go home and play the tape back and write it in longhand, then type it up and string all the sentences together. But it was a very easy process because, you know, I found the people interesting. I asked the right questions. I did my research. So after I kicked a couple of goals in rugby league publishing, my publisher said, well, what else do you want to do? You know, and he was great. And he was having a bit of trouble with Jimmy Barnes, of all people. Jimmy Barnes was supposed to do a book with him and wouldn't do the book. So he'd paid the money and Jimmy Barnes was, you know, he was on tour, he was going through a few issues, and then I said, look, I'll do it. Oh, you know, I didn't know you did popular music, and I said, look, I'll write anything if it's an interesting story. So I went and knocked on Jimmy Barnes's door in Vaucluse and spent 10 weeks with him getting his thoughts down. So I knew then it was transferable from rugby league to pop.
And what stage was Jimmy in then?
He was going through a bit of a renaissance. He could have gone the way of an also ran.
Yeah.
He could have been doing club acts at the RSL, but he reinvented himself soon after. Got his act together, and
so this is after Cold Chisel.
After Cold Chisel, and after his first wave of
Working Class Man.
This is 2000, 2001.
Okay, yep.
He's 45. Where do I go to from here? And he reinvented himself. He's an icon now. He's written his own books. You know, all power to him. So once I did Jimmy Barnes, the publisher said, well, what do you want to do next? And I said, look, I always wanted to write a book on the Wanda Beach murders. And I grew up in Penrith in the 60s and 70s. A lot of my cousins we called them Penrith surfies. They used to catch the train from Penrith.
Central Coast?
No, they used to go to Cronulla. Cronulla and Wanda.
And walk across the road, up the arcade there, yeah.
Cronulla
we used to do it myself in high school.
Cronulla is the only beach that is accessible by train in Sydney.
Yeah.
You have to catch a bus.
It's a long train trip, but
can you still do it today? Because I know you've got to catch a ferry to Manly. Okay.
Train to Central and train out. We used to do it in high school ourselves. You go down the big escalator.
And you're there.
Well, when are we going?
I can drive now. It takes a half the time.
So my older cousins, shout out to the Flints and to the Callahans and You know, they were Penrith surfies, and they would come back and tell these horrendous stories that they'd heard from the other surfies of how 2 girls were murdered on the beach, their throats were cut, they were raped, and they were buried in the sand dunes. And, you know, it just freaked me out as a young kid, as they would, you know, a bit like stories around the campfire.
Yeah.
So I grew up with that, and by the time I was 18, 19, there was a bit of information in the public domain about what happened to these 2 poor girls. And so when I had the chance after doing a couple of rugby league books and doing the Jimmy Barnes book, I said, well, I want to do a book on the Wanda Beach murders. And this is in 2002, before podcasts and before true crime was really popular. And the publisher said, yeah, right, off you go and do it. And I said to my wife, who was also a school teacher at the time, how do I write it? What do you do? Do you go to the newspaper and ask them, who do you interview? And we're very lucky because one of the kids that we taught was the son of a guy called Russell Oxford, who was the head of unsolved homicide in Sydney.
Wow.
And my wife just said, Russell Oxford said that he'd help you with the books. And I was actually acting principal of a school in the Baulkham Hills. And Russell Oxford rang me up one day and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm running a school. And he said, can I pop in for morning tea? And I said, yeah. And he actually bought 8 folders of information about this high,
wow,
about a metre high, plonked them on my desk, and he said, that's the Wanda Beach investigation. He said, off you go. And I've often wondered, why did Russell give me the case notes? Is because the case had run dead, you know, it was insolvent, nothing was happening. And I thought they probably thought, well, if somebody writes about it, it might spark something up, which it did, you know, it sort of started a whole discussion. So that got me into the true crime genre. And
out of the Wanda thing, did you set out to try and solve it, or you set out to document it? You said, I'll just document it. Yeah. So
look,
keep going.
No, you never have the ego that I'm going to solve this.
I'll be the one that's smarter than everyone else.
A thousand cops couldn't solve it. You're not going to solve it. All you do is write what is known, what is unknown, and what the theories are.
Yeah.
And what I did, I set the case out, and in fact I got criticised in a couple of reviews, well, he doesn't advance the case anymore. But I started the conversation about, well, what happened to these 2 poor girls? And if it happened today, would we know what happened and whatever? And look, a lot of leads came out of that, and that got me writing about the Beaumont children, which were
over in South Australia.
Yeah, three siblings in South Australia went missing, and that's been a 15-year journey with that. Once again, we don't know what happened, but we know a lot more than what we did.
Does that get dark as an author, or are you able to space yourself from it?
Oh, for sure. No, look, it does, because I'm a school teacher. I'm not a forensic scientist. So, So if you're going to see crime scene photos, it's quite confronting.
Oh, so you've got the case file. You've got everything. Yeah.
You saw everything. And to see, 2 15-year-old girls with their throats cut, buried in a sand dune, is when you've got a 15-year-old daughter, is very confronting. I remember I did the Anita Cobby book sometimes later, and my go with the true crime is not to write about the gory details, but to write about what was the impact on society, what did we learn from it, and how can we stop it from happening again. I have no interest in saying, like a lot of schlock writers who write off the internet, and then this next gory bit happened, and this. It's okay. What was the impact? What did we learn about it? Was justice done? And how do we stop this from happening? And Anita Cobby happened in Western Sydney. Actually, I was teaching in Blacktown at the time when it happened.
Close to home.
Yeah, I taught 2 of the kids that heard her being kidnapped off the main street. Star witnesses. I taught both those kids. So I was sort of involved. And Western Sydney was vilified when Anita Cobby was killed. Animals. We are animals, because the murderers came from... But Anita Cobby also came from the western suburbs. So we couldn't have the good and the bad. We had to understand. So that was my go. So the first policeman that I asked, a guy called Ian Kennedy, who was the head detective, I met him at a coffee shop in Randwick, and I said, are you up to talking about this? He goes, yeah, I'll talk about it. He said, are you up to talking about it? I said, yeah, I'm fine. He opened up a folder. He goes, do you want to see the crime scene photos of Anita Cobby murdered in a field? And I said, no, I don't want to see them. But I have to see them, because if you don't see them, then you tend to intellectualise the crime. Oh, this was a horrific crime. Oh, what they did to her was... But if you haven't seen it and experienced it... And look, I think I handled it pretty well, and I I can disassociate it from it a little bit.
Yep.
But people who read true crime, people who write true crime, need to know that there are victims' families. There's this ripple effect that happens with crime, and don't think for a moment that anything that you write brings comfort to the people, because it doesn't.
No, that's right.
So I go into it with that sort of mindset. I've enjoyed my true crime, but I won't be writing a lot more because it does take a lot out of you.
Yeah. We might just finish on sorry, Ollie.
I just want to get a little personal before we finish
Sure.
up. As I think you'd know, when I was young, 6 years old, my mother unfortunately passed away. Now, kids cope with grieving through many different means. My way, funnily enough, was actually reading your books, yours and Ian Collins' books. Obviously, Dad, because he's mates with me, he had all your books. At about 7 years old, I don't know how I did it, I managed to read through front to back 100 Years of Rugby League. That came out in 2007.
Yeah.
That helped me cope a lot, and that is the spark that started my passion for writing about rugby league and talking about rugby league. You could argue if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be in my current job with Everything Rugby League. I wouldn't be running my page, Rugby League in My Opinion, that has gotten me to this point. I wouldn't be on this podcast. And to anyone out there who thinks I'm a rugby league nut and knows a lot about rugby league history, it's because of this man and Ian Collis. So I need to shake your hand and say thank you for that, my friend.
Beautiful.
Well, Ollie, it's my pleasure, because rugby league is my comfort food as well. I've written about crimes and biographies and history. I've written a very successful series on famous speeches. I love American history. I love ancient history. I've written a book on
Dan Carlin, man. Listen to Dan Carlin. Avoid it. Podcast? No. Talk about it later.
No. Unfortunately, I'm of the.
You try and keep us.
I'm of the
clean as you
generation
can.
that I'm not really affected by podcasts.
Yeah.
And I realise there's a lot of true crime. My kids tell me.
I can't listen to true crime, but history I can.
Yeah, I love history. So I've written about I've been very happy to write about a lot of different things, and I'm still looking for different things I want to write about. But my comfort food is rugby league, because that's what you grow up with. I love writing about the Panthers. I love talking about the Panthers. I love writing about rugby league. I met 3 or 4 players I've admired. Ted Goodwin tonight. Grew up watching him play. And I think it's true, Ollie, that growing up in a rugby league town, you feel very connected to the game. It's a very visceral experience. And it's also memories. A lot of your happiest memories are going to Penrith Park and watching the Panthers win. They are for me, and I love writing about that. I wrote a book called Mud, Blood and Beer about growing up in the 70s, a Penrith supporter. We won nothing in the 70s. Couldn't catch a cold. And but I really enjoyed writing that book because that was a personal journey. And as an extension of that is what you guys are doing. You are following your passion on podcasts. So all power to you, and keep on going.
A couple of things, because I'll quickly just say, because I was going to talk to you off air, but I may as well do it on air, and that's a beautiful thing you just said, Ol, and that's a magnificent thing.
Real good, Ol.
But actually, we'll talk off air, because I'd love to have you back for a full hour and a half and talk actual footy in Penrith, because rather than tack you on to the end of a show where we've talked to 8 different blokes. But we'll talk about it. Hopefully, over
I'd love to come back
next
and
6
talk
months
about
we'll do it
rugby
properly. Unfortunately, we drink at the Gums and the Colonial, so we'll have to get out of the way of the Gemmo to sit down and have a beer there.
Don't come to the Gemmo. I'll come to you.
Even
come
better.
to the Gums.
Good deal.
I'll come to the
but we
Gums.
can work something out. We can sit there. Oh, it doesn't have to be over a beer. It can be over whatever it might be.
Do a
but
simulcast.
we will do. No, but I know Al's doesn't mind the Gemmo. Dragged Vinny out there a few times myself, man. But so we'll liaise, and hopefully we can do a proper show. I'd love to do a proper show and talk about your passion, our passion, and that sort of thing. But a couple of quick questions to ask. Pat Webster, that was something last year, timely given last week. He hung up the boots.
I was talking to him yesterday.
How was it dealing with him? How is he? He comes across as a generally likeable bloke. How is
beautiful guy. Another one of my passions is
racehorse trainer, trained Happy Clapper for those unaware.
Is horse racing. I love horse racing. Grew up with horse racing.
Yeah, me too.
In the 70s and 80s. I'm currently doing a book on the immortals of horse racing. So I've got to identify the 24 horses, and I would love to have put Happy Clapper in there. But look, when I was publishing, I just came across Pat Webster by accident. Pat Webster does a lot of work behind the scenes. Not only is he a great bloke, great trainer, got a great horse in Happy Clapper, won $6 million, won Group 1 races, but he works with drug and alcohol counselling with industry members such as jockeys, staff members, even trainers who buckle to the pressure. And meeting Pat was fantastic. And I spoke to him the other day when he announced his retirement. I wished him all the best. He's had a fantastic career, and he'll continue to have a great career. Yeah. So no, that was just another byproduct of being in the right place in the right time, and just writing about something you're passionate about.
Fantastic. And lastly, just for the sake of this show and a podcast, thoughts on the modern game? How much you enjoying footy currently? How did you get through the grand final last year?
Tough.
Yeah.
No, look.
And looking forward to next year. So, by a two-part question there.
I like the game. I like the product. I follow the Panthers. I was at the grand final, and I was heartbroken that they lost because they could have won it.
Yeah.
But it's not the game I grew up with. It's a different game.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a faster, more athletic game. The game I watched in the 70s, which is why I loved it, was because it was a more man-on-man, more skillful game. But there's also a lot of thuggery and a lot of violence, which I don't love or advocate or miss. But the game today is much faster. Fantastic athletes, but the players are not accessible, as accessible to even guys like you.
Yeah.
But, they are on a pedestal. They're young blokes earning big money. Yes, they deserve it because the media makes millions out of them. But I think they miss something. They miss either the personalities.
Even as simple as in Penrith, because we both remember 91, we both remember... Yeah. I remember even in 03 there was street parties. And
yeah,
that's right.
I'd struggle to think... I know we're a different era right now of COVID, but I couldn't imagine there being street parties, people running out of their front doors. I remember 03.
Mate, can I just cut you off, right?
Yeah, sorry. Of course you can.
So this year, Penrith makes the grand final. They do their big road train around Penrith. He was whinging that they were beeping horns out front of his house down Jemison Road.
Filthy Penrith fans. I just couldn't understand what they were doing. I was like, why are you doing half hour later? Are you going somewhere? It's just up and down Gemmo Road.
Unfortunately, COVID probably put a dampener on any... half the people who support the Panthers probably couldn't even go to the game.
Yeah, that's right.
I got a season ticket. I think I went to 3 matches.
Well, we went to the grand final as well.
Yeah.
Fortunate enough, me, Dad and Pat. So.
Yeah. Look, it was great to be there, but look, it's a different game. I'm not a big fan of the fact that there seems to be a lot of momentum in the game. The fact that the Storm can score 26 points in a row and then we score 20 in a row.
Momentum is massive now. It's 18 points is nothing anymore. It's
no.
It's
like 2020 cricket.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're up
not the
20,
worst analogy.
If you're up 20-0 in a game, it's not one.
And had no ball, you just go, we'll get the ball back.
And the other team can come back and win and score 20 points easily.
Yeah.
So there's something they've got to tweak there. I don't know what it is. I'm not a big fan of making the game faster. We don't want it to become touch football.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the 10-metre rule. Maybe they should go back to the 5 and the 5 metres. But it's still the best thing we've got, so we might as well go with it. And good luck to them next year. I think they'll win the premiership in 21.
Yep. Fantastic. Ollie, I might give you the last word to sign this segment off. But hopefully, as I said, Al, hopefully we can catch up and do this again and maybe do a better forum.
I can tell you some hairy stories about the Panthers.
Can't wait.
From the old days.
Been lucky enough. We did 90 minutes with Royce, start of the year.
Royce is another guy that I worked with on his book in 2001. He's a legend.
Yeah, very accommodating, lovely guy.
Lovely guy.
Better off air than on. That's all we're saying, Simple as that. That is Royce.
What stays on tour? What happens on tour stays on tour.
So we'll leave it as simple as that. But Ollie, I'll hand you the floor for this one.
Yeah, well, I want to thank everyone for listening to this part of the interview. Alan, I'm sure we'll definitely get you on again, especially because you're local, and we could talk for ages and ages and just go on because you've been involved in so much rugby league, as you said, true crime and that. We want to delve into all of it, history as well. And one day we will. But for now, unfortunately, we have to say goodbye. But thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Al. You're welcome.
Thanks, Al.